What's up guys, Dark Rain Albion here, and today we're going to be covering making our own builds in Albion and everything in between. We're going to be talking about the content that weapons are good for, how we should be itemizing for certain content, how to effectively buy IP, and how to be cost efficient in our sets. Albion can be very complicated in the marketplace and IP and all of those things, and mixing that with things being super expensive or not understanding exactly what makes things cost more can make it really hard to understand what's going on. And today I hope to bring you guys some clarity, and we're going to start off by hopping right into the Destiny board here. When we're talking about the Destiny board and the items we can equip or what we're going to be used to fighting, we are going to be looking at the trainee fighter tree here. This is going to connect to everything that we can equip, our weapons and our armor. We have the Journeyman Plate Armor Fighter here, we have the Journeyman Warrior here, we have the Journeyman Leather Armor Fighter here, we have the Hunter, we have the Cloth Armor Fighter, and the Mage. These all branch out into individual weapons or items that we're going to be using. When we're looking at the Destiny board, we're going to break it down like this. We have our very first tree. This is going to connect to our base trees. So this tree is going to be connected to every leather hood. Now, when we zoom in on the leather hoods, we can see we have all of the specific leather hoods over here. When we click on our base tree, the passive bonus for each point in this is 0.2 bonus to item power for all leather hoods. Then we can see the rewards for our levels all the way through here. When I'm leveling up my leather hood fighter, the specific base tree, it's giving me 0.2 bonus to item power for all leather hoods. This is really good, but a lot of our power is going to be determined by the combat specialist at the bottom of the tree here. Clicking on the mercenary hood combat specialist, we can see that it gives us that same 0.2 bonus to item power for all leather hoods, but it also gives us an additional +2 specialization bonus to item power for mercenary hood specifically. Now, that adds up to about 220 in the specific hood when we have one, because we get the 2 times 100, and then we get the 0.2 times 100 as well. That is 220 item power total. When I'm looking at my item power of the flat 4 mercenary hood, if I mouse over the actual number, I can see that the base IP is 700, and that's before quality is added to it at the repair bench. Enchantment is added to it, whether it's crafted with enchanted goods or you're using runes to upgrade it. I can just see this is 700. My mastery bonus is upping that to 1019. Now, if I go to tier 6, we can see that the base is 900. When I go up in tier, starting at tier 5, I get a mastery modifier. That increases the mastery, and you guys can see I get +16 from this modifier. At tier 8, it is 20%. At tier 7, it's 15. At tier 6, it's 10. And at tier 5, it is 5%. I can look at the IP for all of these, and I can see the base IP for tier 6 is 900, base IP for tier 7 is 1000. That means that due to my spec, my tier 4 mercenary hood is going to be stronger than someone's tier 7 if they don't have spec. So that's an important thing to keep in mind with the strength of our builds, is my specialization in all of what we're using. Now, if we click on a weapon tree, it's going to have the same things at the bottom, that +2 bonus, that 0.2 bonus as well, but we're going to have a different leveling progression in the base tree here. It's going to be including new skills, new passive skills, as well as getting to the point where we can use tier 8, tier 7, things like that. So that covers the Destiny board. If you guys want to look for something specific, we can search it up in the top right. Otherwise, we can just follow, hey, leather armor, leather boots. We can follow that all the way down to here. Now, one thing that gets a little complicated is the artifacts or the royal hoods start to give us less specialization bonus for all leather jackets. So make sure when you're thinking of getting high spec, we're focusing on the first 3, and that applies to all of our weapons and armor as well. In the first 3 here, I'm getting 0.2, 0.2, 0.2, and then I'm going to start getting 0.1. And for the crystal weapons, I actually get a bonus to all of the warrior weapons and offhands, which is connected to the Journeyman Warrior tree here. Now, when I'm thinking of making a build in Albion, I need to balance the cost of the build with how powerful it's going to make me, as well as what content I'm doing. So if I'm spending a ton of money, I want to make sure that I'm going to be very powerful. But if I want to make a build where I'm okay with losing it and it's not super serious, I want to make sure that I'm being very cost efficient. And that's what we're going to get into now. If you guys don't know, all of the items in Albion are going to be crafted by players, and so it's easy to see, or it's easy to break down the cost by looking at the materials, and that'll show us why certain things are more expensive here. We have the Demon Fang. This piece here is very cheap, so it doesn't up the cost of the Demon Fang that much. If we look at something like the Twin Slayers though, this specific piece is very expensive, and that's going to cause the price of them to go up and up and up. When I'm making a build, I want to make sure that I'm paying attention to that, because looking at the market, when I type in Twin Slayers, for tier 4, 4.1, Enchantment 1, Enchantment 2, Enchantment 3, and Enchantment 4, it's still going to require that same piece, but the cost of the materials, the steel bars, and the worked leather is going to go up. So that's why the cost of this, from about Enchantment 0 to Enchantment 3, doesn't go up a ton compared to other things, because the main expensive component isn't going up in cost as these go up in enchantment. Now if we look at tier 5 Twin Slayers at 0 quality, we can see that they're more expensive than the 4-3, even though they're going to be less powerful. And that's because the Death Touch Crystal, once again, is rising in price with that new tier 5 here. So we want to keep that in mind when we're building our sets. If we're looking at, let's say, a Scholar Cowl, which is just takes material, just takes ornate cloth. When I'm looking, I want to make sure that I'm not buying something that's overly priced for no reason. A good example is buying a 4-4 Scholar Cowl. There's none up. Let's look at 5-4. A 5-4 Scholar Cowl is going to be 1 million silver. It's going to be 1569 IP. Now, this is the equivalent of tier 9. We combine the tier with the enchantment quality. If we look now at what 8-1 costs, we're going to see it's only 259k, and this is going to be significantly stronger due to that mastery modifier here. So when we're making our sets, we want to look through, we want to add the tier plus the enchantment, and look at things like that. So this is like tier 9 because we're adding the enchantment in. So we can look at something like 7-2, and that's going to be even cheaper. We are going to lose out on that mastery modifier, so to be as strong as possible, all our equipment we would want it to be tier 8, but when we're talking about cost efficient sets, we're going to be wanting to spend as little money as possible. There's a lot of cases where 4-2 is going to be cheaper than tier 6. There's going to be cases where tier 6 is cheaper. We want to balance how much this costs with the mastery modifier to get the most bang for our buck in making a strong set. Now that we've covered purchasing our items, we want to make sure that our items are going to work well together and it's going to work good for the content that we are doing. A good way to look at what people are currently doing or what the current meta in the content that you want to do is by looking at the rankings. That's going to be in the top right up here. It's the little graph. We can click on it here, and now we can look at, I have it currently clicked on PvP fame for Mist. We can click this week, last week, or all time. It's always best to look at this week just to see what is going on exactly. I'm going to look at the top guy. I'm going to see what he's doing. This is in the Mist, 0 assists. He's playing longbow, soldier armor, demon boots, and helmet of valor. We can see that his spec is up in all of these items. It's a little inefficient to run a set this big without the correct spec, because like we were talking about, my tier 4 is going to be the equivalent of someone's tier 7 if they don't have spec, and so it'll be a waste of money to run something this big without having that spec here. But we don't necessarily need to run this exact build. We can take a look. He's using a purge, he's using soldier armor, he's using healing pots, snapper, the smuggler's cape. And we can put this all together and get a good breakdown of what he's trying to do and replicate it in smaller sets, or even just downscaling this exact set here. We can do this with almost every form of content by clicking on this. We can look down, we can go to PvP fame and corrupted dungeons, we can see who's at the top, we can click. When I'm looking here, I want to make sure that it says corrupted layer. I don't want to be looking at them maybe doing ZVZ or things like that. This guy got quite the kill on somebody who was in some 8-3 in there. That's awesome to see. That's why I put him to the top. And we can look at his quarterstaff build here and think, oh, he's using the mercenary hood and he's staying on people. He's using the howl. Maybe he has issues with interrupting people, or he needs to decrease the damage dealt. The mercenary jacket synergizes really well with the quarterstaff W because it hits 3 times, the Q hits a bunch of times, and so he's able to heal. And then he has night boots on for a big shield to stay on to people, but also to give him some extra survivability. We can look through the rankings to get better ideas of what people are doing in the content that we want to do. After we've decided, hey, this build looks nice, we're going to want to focus on choosing the first part of our build, which is going to be the weapon. The weapon is the most important part of our build in Albion because we need to make sure that our armor is going to synergize well with it. If we are using something like, let's say, a fire staff, and we are using that with Hellion Jacket, the Hellion Jacket really works well when you're brawling, you're on people. It's more for melee focused. If we were using something like a sword or battle axe, this would be an awesome choice. But since we're going to be using a ranged weapon, it's just not going to work as well. For Fire Staff, since we are casting a lot and standing still a lot, we'd want to focus more on things that make us tough without having to move, like the Guardian Boots. The Guardian Boots are great because we can gigantify. It'll increase our current HP by a ton, making us a lot less susceptible to burst, and we'll be able to continue to stand there and shoot those fire bolts. If we're looking at another weapon like War Gloves, and let's look at the Brawler Gloves, War Gloves has a ton of ability-based burst, and I will have to do it from melee range. So choosing something like the Hellion Shoes, which gives us a blink behind or a dash and an increase to damage, will synergize really well with those. It'll put us close to our opponent, give us that damage boost for our abilities as well. So, with all that said, we're going to move into looking at some builds, making our own builds, and talking about what we should be looking out for, cost efficiency versus power, what items are generally good, what we're looking to do in these sets that we've made, and making sure that we're not trying to use the wrong weapons in the wrong type of content. Albion and the weapons work very good in certain scenarios. If we go look, we can look at the bow tree to look at this. The warbow is going to work really well in 1v1 fights because the E on it only affects one target. Something like the Wailing Bow is going to work much better in group content or ZVZ because it pierces. The more enemies there are, the more damage it does. So a weapon like the Wailing Bow isn't a good build for solo content. Something like the Bow of Badin, something like the War Bow is going to work good in solo content. That doesn't mean the War Bow isn't good in group content, which it is not very good in group content, but some weapons are just going to shine better than other weapons in certain content. We want to make sure that we are aware of that. It can be hard to force a weapon that's meant for group fighting to work in solo content. Something like the claws is a great example. Claws are primarily used for ganking people. You can hold them still, more people can get on them, it's a great bleed that stops the mount from entering gallop. Things like that make this weapon very, very good for ganking, and so you're going to see a lot of gankers use it like that. Something like the Death Givers, where it requires you to apply stacks to your opponent, isn't going to be super good for ganking, but it's going to be much better in a 1v1 scenario than the claws because it's meant more for fighting than for ganking. So we want to make sure that we're not forcing a weapon to do something that it can't do. Starting off making our builds, we're going to go look at the rankings. We're going to go look at PvP fame this week, and we're going to see what the top players that are killing people, regardless of any content, what they're doing and what builds they're using. Clicking on the top guy, we're going to go down. He seems to have a big kill here, but we're going to look more so what he's doing. He's playing Infernal Scythe, Hellion Jacket here. That looks great. Let's look at all time. Let's see if that is reflective. Oh, we see someone playing Hellspawn Staff here. Let's make a Hellspawn Staff build here. When I'm thinking about my build, I'm going to go check out what the weapon does. The Hellspawn Staff is a shapeshifter staff, so let's see. The Hellspawn Staff does a lot of abilities, it does a lot of attacks, and it wants to auto-attack here. When I scroll down and look at the transformation stats, it looks like it's pretty squishy, so I'm going to want a few things to help me survive, and I'm going to want things that benefit from attacking a lot. So when I'm thinking of making this build, we're going to start off by buying a cost-efficient Hellspawn. When I look up Hellspawn staff, we can see that the same thing as the crystal daggers apply here. When I scroll down, this is going to cost an Imp Remnant, which is pretty pricey, as well as the Rugged Imp's Horns, which are pretty pricey as well. That's going to cause the tier 4 one to be a lot cheaper than the flat 5 one. Now when I look for 1, the price doesn't go up by much, even though this will be at the same power as that tier 5. So looking up, 4-2 looks like a nice price. It looks very good. It's not super expensive. If I wanted to be stronger, of course going up in tier would be great, but for a good cost efficient start, I'm going to go with the 4-2 Hellspawn staff here. Now I'm going to go with something that synergizes with it attacking a lot, and I'm going to go for the Mercenary Jacket here. Now I'm looking for a good price Mercenary Jacket. I'm going to look at tier 6, 42k, 5-1 is 20k, 4-2 is 25k. So 5-1's looking like the sweet spot for my build, but since I'm using a weapon that's pretty expensive, I'm going to make sure that all of my pieces of gear are about the same cost. If I'm running a 20,000 silver jacket with a 200,000 silver weapon, my build isn't going to be super strong because my armor is going to be so heavily lacking. So I'm going to up this and get perfect 100k. That's going to be close to the price of my weapon. I'm going to buy this. Now, I need a way to survive a little bit better, and since I'm using a shapeshifting staff, it would be great to have a buff I could apply to myself that doesn't matter whether I shape in or shape out of the staff, and I think a Hunter Hood is going to work perfect for that. 42,000 here. When we go to tier 7, that's 60k, so we're going to go back down to 6-1 here. I'm making sure I'm mapping out all my options. 5-2, 47k, 6-1, 42k. So 6-1's the sweet spot. I want to make sure that I'm not spending a overly priced amount on something that's not going to be a lot stronger for the sake of my build. Now for my boots, I don't think I'm going to be having energy problems with this build, so I'm going to go for some soldier boots here. 48k. Let's see what flat 7 is. 39k. That looks great. Perfect here. Now this set's 368k, which is a price range where I'm going to want a really good cape. If I'm using a set that's only 100k or cheaper, using a cape like the Smuggler's Cape is going to make our set almost double in price. So I want to make sure that my set is around this 350k mark before I'm investing in wearing a cape here. Smuggler's Cape is perfect. I'm going to run some healing pots to help with my survivability. And just some beef stew. Always a safe bet, it's relatively cheap here. Now, we just walked through making a build, thinking about how the weapon works, and going through here. If you guys don't have a ton of knowledge of how all of the items in Albion work, like I said, it's always a safe bet to go into the rankings to look at what popular people are doing. I have a few build guides on my channel to get you guys started as well. Now, talking about my consumables as part of our build, we want to make sure that we're not using overly priced consumables. A lot of the high level players are using enchantment 3 level food. You guys can see that makes my beef stew go from 3,000 to 210,000 here. The benefit, if we mouse over, is 17.5% compared to 13.5%. So we're getting a 4% damage bonus, but our set will cost 50% more. That silver will be much better used in a different way for this set. Maybe I want to upgrade my weapon, I want to upgrade my armor, something like that is going to be much better than spending a ton on our food. Once you guys get more experienced and your sets are bigger, using that expensive food gains more of a benefit. But right now, it's extremely cost inefficient towards my set to use that. Now, moving into what this set is good for. This set has high single target damage. It has a good ability to brawl or to fight someone one-on-one, but also I'd feel confident in a 2v2 scenario as well. I don't think that the Hellspawn is going to be super strong outside of those scenarios, and if I want to do something more 5v5, more bigger group content, I want to make sure I'm using a different weapon or a different build than this one here. I've made this build specifically for fighting someone one-on-one or fighting in very small scale PvP engagements. Now, we've talked about making our builds, we've talked about cost efficiency, we've talked about where our item power comes from, and we're going to cover a few last things before we wrap up here. When I'm thinking of increasing the power of my build, we have a few options. We have buying higher tier items that are going to have higher item power than what I'm using now, buying higher tier consumables, and we have one last one, which is siphoned energy. Siphoned energy is overcharging your gear. That's going to increase the IP of all of the main items, these 5 right here: the helmet, the chest, the boots, and the weapon or the offhand. That is going to increase our power by a lot. It's a great option to use, but we want to make sure that we're being as cost efficient as possible with our IP. When we're thinking, hey, I'm going to increase my power from tier 5 to 5-1, that's going to look like only an 8,000 silver difference. That's not too big at all. When we get into the bigger sets, like moving from 8.2 to 8.3, we can see the difference is going to start to be millions of silver. And that's when that increased quality of food or increased enchantment of food is going to be really important. But we also want to know that when we start to get into bigger sets, it's going to start to be more expensive to increase our power. At around this 5.1 to 5.2 mark, stuff starts to get a lot more expensive, and that's kind of that tier 7 jump that we see. Flat 6 is also relatively cheap, and so we want to make sure that when we're playing these builds, we are aware of how expensive our sets are and what it's going to be good at. We don't want to be using weapons in the wrong spots. We don't want to be in overly priced sets that we're not sure how to play. That can feel very bad and very abrasive to die in sets that are millions of silver when you don't have spec, when maybe just your cape was 2 million silver and you don't understand why that caused you to lose, which is a great point right now. Our cape is really important, but it's not as important as anything else. All this cape really does is allow me to use a second potion, which is great. But you guys see, when I equip all this gear, my average IP is 1217. If I'm missing a cape, it goes down by 120, but my actual strength in a fight isn't down by that much. If my weapon was much cheaper, we would see the actual ability damage go down, the damage resistances go down. We would see things like that be directly affected. When I'm using something like the Hunter Hood, it's always going to reflect 85% of that incoming damage. The damage resistances may vary depending on how high tier it is, but the main point, which is that reflect, isn't going to change. So we want to make sure that the most expensive part of our set is our weapon, because that is what gains the most power from the IP. Our boots, our sprint is always going to be 80%. The 127 health isn't going to change much, even if I go up to tier 8.3 soldier boots, which is a huge jump. It's going to be millions of silver more. You guys can see I'm actually only getting 40 more health over those 5 seconds. We can see the max health and max energy down here is going to go up a substantial amount, and that is very important. But the actual strength of the abilities on specifically boots and helmets doesn't go up by much compared to the chest piece or the weapon. We can see, if you guys click on your gear and scroll down, what actually our pieces of gear give us, like armor, max health. This chest piece is going to be the most vital part of my set. The helmet, you guys can see it just doesn't have as many stats on it, as many important factors on it. Our boots, same thing, doesn't have many important factors. You can fight someone very easily with just a weapon and chest piece. You guys will see there'll be dual scammers who will fight you just weapon only when they have a tier 2 chest piece on, because our chest piece makes that much of a difference. So make sure we're not spending 500k on our helmet and 100k on our weapon. That's just not going to be super efficient on making a strong and powerful set. While it's important to make sure we're using something that we find fun and enjoyable, we always want to make sure we're using the best option for the content that we are currently doing. We can almost always find a weapon for every type of content in each of the trees here. We can look at something like Dagger. We can look at Dagger Pair, which is going to have very intense single target damage and healing reduction. Or we can look at something like the Bridal Fury, which is going to have just huge AoE damage. Something like the Bloodletter, which is going to be able to kite. Something like the Claws, which is going to be able to gank. We want to be looking in our specific weapon tree and finding the weapon that best suits the content that we are doing. If you guys have any questions about building sets, how to be efficient, you guys can add me as a friend in-game. I'm happy to help. I hope this guide helped you guys. Comment below any questions or anything that you guys would need clarified a little bit better. But summarizing everything that we talked about, we want to make sure that we're being cost efficient with our sets while remaining really strong. And that's going to be looking at the gear, making sure it synergizes well, making sure we're spending money on the right things, and we don't want to have a bloated IP for no reason. There's going to be sets where we could get more IP, but it's just starting to not be helpful. With capes specifically, having a tier 8-3 cape for something like the Smuggler's Cape isn't going to make the biggest difference. It's going to lower the cooldown, but when we're fighting in 1v1, we're really only going to need one use of our cape if it's a big cape like this. So make sure we're reading our abilities and actually what is changing on our weapons. We can just mouse over the abilities, see, hey, this does 327 magic damage. My tier 8-3 one is going to do 500 weapon damage. That's worth it to me to buy. But I hope you guys enjoyed. Like, subscribe, and comment. Leave any questions you have down below. I'll be happy to answer them for sure. And good luck out there, guys. Hope you guys make some awesome builds. If you guys have any build ideas for me that you want me to try out, any build ideas that you're like, whoa, is this going to work? I'll be happy to check them out in the comments below or in-game. Thank you guys so much for watching. Have a good one.